welcome to the Youth and the Future of AI conference, and specifically to today's AI for Fintech session. My name is Chax, and I am going to be hosting the panel today with three really impressive, distinguished speakers. A big thanks to them for really taking their time and coming here to share with us on this very important agenda. So today's theme is fintech, and I know that's a very broad word. And I'm just going to set up the stage first before we introduce the speakers and give them the stage and then launch into panel questions. And I just want to, a lot of people maybe have heard of the term, but don't really know what it means. But essentially, it's a very broad term that incorporates many areas, right? It's new tech that seeks to improve and also automate the delivery and use of financial services. But when we say the word quote unquote fintech, we can mean many different things. And I'm sure each of these things can be its own conference session. We can be talking about on the consumer side, right? What it means to be taking out a loan really fast these days. I think, for example, in China, you can do that within seconds, right? By just through your mobile phone. It could mean doing mobile payment on your phone. It could also mean making investment in a much more automated fashion. But fintech could also mean very different things for business owners, right? For example, how do we help them to gain access to financing in a more efficient and convenient way? It could also mean different things for investors. So for example, how do you make better investment decisions? How do we use data to empower investors to do that? So again, we can't be covering all the angles in today's session. So today we're really going to be leveraging our speakers' expertise and focus on a few things, right? So we're going to be talking about the consumer side, what it means to improve and expand financial access to a marginalized population, what it means to build up, in addition to financial access, build up financial health for households and businesses. How do we help businesses better access credit? And then also on the investment side, for example, using machine learning to form new alternative data for better portfolio management. So we're going to be touching on specific angles on these very broad topic, hopefully to give our audience a flavor of what this area means, what working in it means practically, and for other youth that want to work in this area, what are the things we need to, what are the critical issues that we will be needing to thinking about. So that's just a very quick intro to set up the stage. Next, I'm going to send a big welcome to our three panelists. I'm going to do a brief introduction for each of them, and then I'm going to give them the time for them to tell you a little more about their work from their own perspective. So first we have Christine. Christine, do you want to tell everyone where you're calling from today?
Hi everyone. I'm calling from the sunny side of Surrey, south of London Bridge, well, very south, because I'm working from home still. And nice to meet you all here.
Great, welcome, Christine. So Christine is currently the global head of stewardship at HSBC Asset Management, and also a board member of HSBC Asset Management UK Limited. So she is someone I met through work, and she is someone very respected in the industry because she comes with 25 years of experience in investment management, research and consulting, and really with a focus on both technology and sustainability. And prior to joining HSBC, she was the executive director in charge of ESG. So for those who don't know what ESG is, it stands for environment, social, and governance, advisory, and also integration at IHS Markit, and as the global head of technology, Asia and emerging markets, and prior to IHS Markit at Federated Hermes. So the bio Christine sent me is, it's very long because she has so many experiences, but I will just end with that she was actually named as one of the top 30 inspirational women in the City of London. Very impressive. And in 2020, she also won the Finance Monthly Women in Finance Award as the Investment Management Leader of the Year. So a big thanks to Christine for joining us today. And next we have Edward. Edward, where are you calling from today? Do you want to say hi?
Like Christine, I'm calling from the UK. It's one of the rare sunny days, so yes, I have my window open.
That's great. Great. Welcome, Edward. So Edward works at the intersection of tech, finance, and social impact to drive social change. He has played leadership and founding roles across many organizations and is currently running his own ventures, so MassRef and Give Funds. He's going to go into more details in that later, but essentially inspired by his visits to over 300 social enterprises globally, Edward co-founded Give Funds to help neglected social enterprises gain access to capital at scale. And then MassRef was started to disrupt the global financial system, providing those in distressed economies with safe banking solutions out of Switzerland. So Edward is a Rhodes Scholar, World Economic Forum Global Shaper, Forbes 30 Under 30 Award, and also the Prestige 40 Under 40 Award. The list goes on. I'm going to stop there. Welcome, Edward. And last, we have Nancy. Hi, Nancy. Do you want to tell everyone where you are calling from today?
Hi everyone, hi Jax. I'm calling from Shenzhen, China. Yeah, it's already at night, but it's a very sunny day.
Awesome. By the way, I'm also calling from Shenzhen, China. I was just saying Nancy and I should have met up and caught from the same place. So welcome, Nancy. So Nancy is actually currently working at United Nations Capital Development Fund. She has been traveling earlier in her career, she has been traveling across Israel to invest in high-tech startups. She also, rolled up her sleeves in Inner Mongolia to prototype Fintech for inclusion products as a co-founder entrepreneur. And as well, she also speaks in conferences to advocate digital consumer protection as head of a think tank. So currently at UNCDF, she is working with financial service providers to design interventions to improve women's financial health, smallholder farmers, as well as the aging population. So a big welcome again to our panelists. I am going to actually now pass the mic to each of you. So, you can share with the audience a little more from your own perspective, the work you've done. And also just your understanding of the issues critical and we need to be thinking about for this particular topic. Who should we start with? Maybe we'll start with Christine.
Sure. Thank you very much for the fantastic introduction. Well, so I work in the space of institutional asset management, so slightly different from maybe VC and maybe the earlier stage and area, but no less do we care about impact. So I guess the early application of AI in investment management tends to come from more of the trading side and looking at systematic trading. But increasingly, because of the movement of sustainability, we're seeing alternative providers coming to fund managers, such as large fund managers such as HSBC, to showcase alternative ways of gathering data and assessing companies. So I guess some of them are particularly insightful when it comes to climate change related. We are seeing more data and technologies that are showcasing geospatial data that spot potentially deforestation and issues. But of course, we need to be aware of the fact that vision imagery as a technique has improved over time, but still local weather conditions could impact the quality of images and hence the interpretation of that image. So this is something that we look at in terms of data set. We find it useful, especially when analyzing the physical impact of climate change and over time change in land use, etc. So certainly an area that investment manager would like to look at and look for alternative solutions. And a point I want to make is also that when interpreting AI, or I don't actually want to use the word AI, I think it's almost used too much. Sometimes I advocate the use of the phrase function approximator, so that we are a little bit more down to earth about what it can provide. It is a technique that is very good at analyzing a large scale of data. But when it comes to the last mile of interpretation, it's very important to have a combination of technical expertise as well as the domain expertise. And one obvious example is using visual imagery in healthcare, because we need medical expertise to be able to analyze and support the analysis of the visual imagery. So aside from alternative data, we're also seeing that in financial services, the use of chatbot, AI chatbot, or onboarding of new colleagues are increasingly being used in customer servicing or employee servicing. So a great way to provide sort of customized and 24/7 services. But at the same time, what we're cautious about is the use of third-party supply chatbot function, because we have seen, whether it's in the UK or in the US or in a number of markets that are already doing that, the nuances is in the training of the data. So, for example, if we're trying to use an AI chatbot that was trained in the US and applied it to China, we would have a problem. It's not only because of the language, but it's also because when you're using the training data, we're actually also using the population characteristics underneath. So one example I can give is if we're trying to measure the characteristics of the population of the UK in the 21st century, and we try to use the population representative in the 16th century, we would get a very, very different results when it is applied, because of the fact that the composition is very different. So it is important to understand the supply chain risk when we're using third-party products. Thirdly is the use of natural language processing and understanding in reading research reports. So you probably are aware that in a lot of markets, over 90% of the company reports and chairman statements and videos are actually read by machines. So we're now seeing companies being very smart at gaming the system and having the right keywords in place, because that's essentially how NLP and NLU work. So we need to fight hard to outwit greenwashing or SDG washing in this context. And finally, I want to connect this point to especially the youth that are on this platform. Some of you might be just coming out of university, and you will probably find that increasingly you're being subject to AI CV screening and AI interviews, and there'll be many rounds of interviews that are maybe partially human moderated, but a lot of times your materials will be read by machines. So I'm actually now working with some researchers, and will be publishing a report on ethical AI in human capital management and on investor expectations, to highlight the upside of using technology, which increases efficiency, transparency, and fairness. But if we don't, if it's not applied in a considered manner, with some clear thoughts on how it is being applied, it actually might exacerbate social inequality because of the fact that we haven't considered the inherent and nuanced issues that are underneath. So that was the 4 points I want to make there. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much, Christine. I just want a quick reminder to the audience, if you have questions as the speakers are presenting or during our panel questions, feel free to type them in chat.
Checks. If you can hear me, we lost your audio.
Yeah.
If you can hear me, we lost your audio. So I'll give you a few seconds to try and fix it. And if not, meanwhile, I will move
okay.
on. There we go. Okay, go for it.
Can you still hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
now we can hear you.
Okay, so we'll pause on Edward first, right? So maybe we'll go to Nancy first.
Is my
Oh, it's back?
yeah, no, it was, I think it was your chat, not mine. It was your speaker. It's okay. Yeah, I can jump in.
Okay,
Okay,
just jump
great.
in, Edward.
Oh, yeah. So a bit more about my career. I think the running theme throughout it was really around accessibility, access to financial services. Early on with gift funds, there was access to impact investments for social enterprises, particularly those in tier 3, tier 4 cities and rural areas where capital really wasn't flowing. And now really it's providing bank accounts to people in distressed economies which have no access to financial services. And I think what I've really learned through this was that I think technology, AI, or machine learning has huge potential in actually including those who have traditionally been marginalized for one reason or the other. And it could be simplified to a large extent down to two factors. One is the information and lack of information on these clients. And correspondingly, the cost of actually obtaining that information about these customers, whoever they might be. And second is actually the cost of serving these customers. What tech, fintech, general technology improvements, for example, through smartphones or the accessibility and ubiquity of smartphones, as well as AI, what they've really done was actually lower the cost significantly and hence lowering the bar significantly and democratizing it across the board, particularly on the retail side, but also for businesses which have traditionally been excluded from the financial service sector. Let me give an example. What do I mean by that, right? Let's look at retail banking, something as simple as retail banking, and the basic functions of the bank. Basically, what a bank does is that they take deposits from customers. So first, they help customers open an account. Second, they take deposits from the customers. And third, they deploy the capital, oftentimes through loans, but many other forms as well. This is essentially what a bank does, right? Let's look at the first part, onboarding people. That's this process called KYC, know your customer. In the past, you have to basically bank people which you know their identities very well. And how do you know their identities? They can go down to the branch, you can see their passport, you can see their education certificates, you can see different things to kind of verify where they stay, their history over time, as well as their identities. This had to be in person, oftentimes, and this also had to be in physical documents in most cases. This has changed drastically because today our phones probably know more about us than any of these certificates, for example. A lot of these identities are also digital. Even in countries like India, for example, which has painfully made the transition towards digital identities. Things like downloading a financial service app. So for example, Neobank, you can download the app, connect it to your social media accounts, and they can see your identity over time, for example. They can even connect it in some cases to, let's say, delivery apps. And then you can see where you get your food delivered over time, which then kind of verifies your address to some extent, not to mention tracking on your phone. Let's go to the next thing. After onboarding the customer is taking their deposits. In the past, it's always been a concern around, source of funds, whether there's terrorist financing when you move money out or money laundering involved through that process. This has always been a problem. At the earliest inception, how tech actually lowered this bar was through innovations like Bcash and M-Pesa. So Bcash is in Bangladesh and M-Pesa is in Kenya. They basically do mobile money. They use, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with prepaid credits in your phone. So you can actually top up prepaid credits in your phone and use that credits to actually transfer money between them and their families further out. And it could act as a mobile money wallet for them, which then incorporated businesses to do these payments. Now, there are other kind of fintechs coming up. I think crypto comes to mind, Web3, even stable coins as well. A lot of this actually tells us where the funds are coming from and provides some traceability for some kinds of transactions, depending on the structure. the changing of phones as well. So as I mentioned earlier, it tells you exactly where you are. So you can tell as a financial institution kind of where people are transacting to and from, and highlight and flag issues like this. So this really allows it to be extremely low cost. You can verify who people are. You can kind of, to some extent, find out where the funds are coming from. And then you can also give that loans out. In the past, it's always credit history. How do you find out about a person's ability to repay? You look at their employment slips. You look at their house collateral. You look at things like that, which oftentimes people in emerging markets have no access to. They have no ability because they work in an informal economy, so they don't have a regular paycheck. They take cash. They don't have property to act as collateral. They don't have guarantors. So banks just say, you know, we don't have enough information, or this information is just too difficult to gather. Information like how trustworthy they are, how accountable they are as a person, things like that, which our phones are now able to tell us. Technology is able to tell us. And machine learning helps us to really crunch through so much data to be able to really decipher this out. I won't go into too much details, but that's basically what we're trying to do at Masra. We're trying to democratize access. We're providing international banking and offshore banking to people in countries where they have no access. So let me give you an example of Lebanon. There, inflation for the last year has been about 150%. People have their monies and their life savings stuck in the bank. Banks are refusing to give it out because of withdrawal restrictions. So you have your life savings in the bank, inflation is 150%, your money is disappearing, basically. And that's happening across countries like Lebanon, Venezuela, Argentina, Zimbabwe, and even other types of countries like, you know, for example, Nigeria, where you just don't have access to other crucial financial services, like investments, for example, or at least a very small fraction of the population has access to that. This is really able to change all of that for these kinds of people. On a last note on gift funds, really what we tried to do is really providing access to funds for social enterprises in rural areas in tier 3, tier 4 cities. This also applies not just to the retail side, as I mentioned, but to the business side. Diligencing these startups have always been very expensive. Funds usually have to send somebody down, take a look at what they're doing, audit their financial statements and things like that. It's simply not possible to do that for companies in rural, in a rural village, 10 hours drive from the nearest city. And it's not even a big city, it's probably a tier 4 city. It's traditionally impossible. What we did instead was basically take about 120 data points from 5 different sources within the local communities. And that gives us a good 360 picture of each of these startups without actually, in many cases, looking at a detailed financial statement, for example. But because of that, we're able to give out loans. We've done about 60 to 70 of these deals, loans and investments. And we've had 0 defaults. Every single one of them repaid, using a lot of this qualitative data, this assurance from the local communities, as well as other non-profit partners they work with. And that's something really, really interesting, which technology just enables today, which was just not possible in the past. I'll leave it at that. I recognize I might have gotten a little over time, so yeah.
No, that's super interesting. I already have a lot of questions that I want to ask. Thank you so much, Edward. Nancy, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I guess it's me then. So thanks, Christine and Edward's amazing sharings. So thanks everyone joining today's conference. So before I start, I have to, for compliance, I have to say a disclaimer. So what I'm sharing today is solely based on my own experience and perspectives, and not represent or express the views, opinions of UNCDF. So as Chex introduced, I started my career as a venture capitalist in high-tech, early-stage Israeli startups, where I had a very initial encounter with AI, data analytics, or in business applications. But I learned a lot from the amazing entrepreneurs I work with. So really inspired by their passion, I am quite determined that I want to find something I could dedicate my career to. And I found it when I saw a very small noodle shop in rural China. They could not simply get a loan from the bank, and pen and paper were used to investigate loan for the loan officers. So just as Edward was describing, so you have to, those micro enterprises do not have financial statements, and their finances are usually messed up with their family household finance. So it requires the law officers to really re-examine every transactions they do and question the community in rural area, the village committee, the neighbors, how credible this person are they responsible in their daily behavior. So this is actually a very long process, and a lot of micro enterprises do not get loan before that. So I was quite sad because those populations, micro enterprises, are actually the backbones of the Chinese economy, and they're not getting properly served with the current banking system. So I co-founded Keystone in 2014. So it's a software as service and data as service provider. So we're empowering the micro enterprise and micro financial institutions in China so that they could provide credit to more micro enterprises in a scalable manner. So we deploy quite some alternative data, credit models, even to examine the psychometrics of micro enterprises to make it easier for them to have access to the loans. So back then it was 2014. So that's when the fintech was quite booming in China. So I remember at peak, there were more than 20,000 peer-to-peer lending companies in China. It was quite a scene. So because at the time, probably you may know that actually more than 70% of population in China, even now, do not have a proper credit record in the central bank. So it's a huge market and has huge potential. And there's a variety of ways to get alternative data, for example, the behavior data, through the behavior data, how you use different apps. For example, if you are logged into some video game app at midnight, probably you're not quite credit worthy. So this is something like everything, like those entrepreneurs are using every kind of methodology to examine a ton of data to provide access and digital credit to the unbanked population. So however, as time goes by, I see a lot of social problems emerge because of that. So a lot of young gig workers, such as deliverymen and factory workers, who were from rural area China, and they left home to work in big cities, and they don't have bank accounts, they don't have bank credits. So they were marketed and attracted by a lot of digital credit providers. So without the proper consumer protection mechanism, so those young population got really trapped in high interest digital credits, and eventually they became over indebted. So, and actually, algorithms played quite a role in the entire in this entire phenomenon. So, for example, the target marketing and repeated advertisement push, and there's a lot of data privacy issues. There are a lot of illegal data trading during that time. So a lot of problems emerged. So I started to think, how a technology actually was meant for inclusion and good ended up hurting people. So I started to move a little bit to research and to rethink what kind of fintech and ecosystem we actually need. So I engage with international organizations, work with World Bank and policymakers to really debate and discuss how to create a mechanism ecosystem to making sure that technology is serving people rather than vice versa. So later I spent a year in the UK, light in the people, got some more systematic training in that sector, and decided that I wanted to carry on exploring this topic, how we can use technology to build a vulnerable population up. So naturally, I joined my current team, the financial health team at UNCDF, which was quite a new kind of startup-like team. So compared with financial inclusion, the term financial health may be less heard. It's quite new. So actually it moves beyond to look at the access of particular product, such as saving account, investment or credit, but to describe an ideal state that people can pay back their daily financial obligations. They can survive on unexpected events, such as a medical bill or simply COVID. So they have the adequate financial knowledge to make financial planning and eventually to realize their life goals and aspirations through the finances. So it's really a more holistic approach to look at a proper combination of saving, investment, credit, insurance portfolio of individual. So, and this quite fully aligns with my vision and incorporates actually a lot of elements of technology innovation. For example, to understand your financial health status, it requires really detailed examination of a certain groups or individuals' financial behavior, your financial different products they're using, and also to make predictions and suggestions. So currently I'm working with financial service providers to identify the hindrances of achieving financial health of women, smallholder farmers, and elder population, and to design innovative interventions to see, if we can really make them their financial lives better and improve their financial health through the technology that we are deploying. So really looking forward for today's discussion. Back to you, Chex.
Great. Thank you, three, so much. I feel very inspired after all of you have spoken about your work. I'm going to start with maybe more of it could be a difficult question, but it could also be just to make sure the audience is on the same page. All of you have spoken about ventures that have a very strong sense of social mission, right? Edward, you talked about improving financial access. Christine, you talked about, preventing greenwashing, and also making youth have better access to work opportunities and less discrimination. And Nancy, you talked about, providing capital and preventing over-indebtedness for youth. And in all these areas, you're working on a for-profit sector that have a very social mission, right? So maybe tell us in the audience first, right? Like, does it sound too good to be true, right? Like, how do these socially minded ventures that you have worked on or you've seen other worked on, how do they make money? How do they make this sustainable? Whoever wants to jump in first.
I could hop in on that. I think for both ventures and the ventures which I've seen, a lot of the best entrepreneurs, they didn't go out to start a for-profit or non-profit or whatnot. I think what was important to them was that they were obsessed about a problem which they had to solve and what was the best solution for it. So it doesn't matter whether it's non-profit or for-profit. That's the thing. Let me give an example. Give Funds itself, a very personal example. It's a non-profit impact fund. We're fully financially sustainable from the spreads and the investment exits we get. But we plow everything back in so we don't take a profit at all to invest. But the reason for that is because we found that it's the best way to work with LPs and funders to service our kind of social enterprises, which were on the ground. Now, that's a very different story for the social enterprises which we're working with. That's a very different story for Musref even, because how we designed it is because for Musref, we need to reach scale. We need to grow quickly. We need to service millions of people who don't have access, and as soon as possible, because they're losing thousands by the day, each of them. And so that's just so much pain. In order to hit that scale quickly and to hit the size which we hope to, we just need venture financing, and that was how we had to design it, basically. So I would say it's not that one is better than the other. I think there's a place for each of them to solve the kind of problems which you want to solve, and let the problems kind of dictate how you design the solution around it.
I like to really agree with that. It's the obsession with knowing the problem exists and you have to find a solution. And whether you make money or not is just ended up being the revenue model. And that in itself can evolve over time. So for example, Amazon initially didn't begin selling their cloud services. It's because that they realized that actually what they have learned from the experience could be packaged to be a product and a service. So I think that any good company, any good institution, they exist to deliver a solution to a problem we recognize and we agree with. And that is what make an institution or a business sustainable is they continue to understand and be able to foresee what is the problem that I can see that is going to come to us, and are we prepared enough to address that so that when it eventually comes to us that we are prepared to solve it. And any company, any institution who's able to address that, whether you're a think tank to think ahead, whether you're a business to prepare your resources ahead, or a regulator even, that to foresee issues instead of chasing yesterday's problems, you will be an institution that is going to continue to add value and to be able to have that influence in the market, because you help people to recognize that there's an issue and sort of light a candle of where we should be going in addressing.
Right. Yeah, this is really a battle I think all of us are fighting, because for me, actually, in my previous startup and also in the current job, one issue constantly comes up to me is that compared to financial inclusion, which provides very specific product and service that could make money. When it comes to financial health, the very first question I receive, whether it's from a startup or from like big financial service providers, that what is it in me? If I'm like focusing on the benefit of customers, can I really make profit? I'm not making charity here. So this is really a mindset problem, because Checks, you work with JP Morgan in financial health, and you understand that actually from a long-term perspective, serving your customers better and empower them actually make your sustainable profit and return out of that. So I think it's pretty much about, it's not a for-profit, non-profit, but to, as Eva says, understand problem, also to really understand the people behind the problem. Who are you really, like, what is the purpose and what is the essence of having a business? For me, I don't think it's like for a business itself or for money. It's about really solving a problem and really to building people up. And it's not contradictory to making money. It's just about, you know, how patient you are. For me, I truly believe that if you're providing a solution that solves the problem and people can feel that you care about them, then it will make you return, like at the end of the day.
Yeah, I really identify and resonate with what you all talked about, which is a very kind of problem-centric approach. I feel like, you know, in today's startup world in particular, a lot of times people are, you know, holding a hammer looking for solutions, right? So, sorry, like, you know, you're looking for problems. You have a solution and you're looking for problems to solve. Like a lot of people would invent, you know, an app or whatever you have. And, you know, we have this thing, you know, what problems can we solve? Instead of starting with an actual problem and thinking about what actual solutions do we have. And a lot of times the most effective solution may not be an app, it may be something entirely different. I think that's definitely something I very much resonate with. My next question, again addressed to everyone on the panel, is in your journey to really kind of push for the agenda that you're very passionate about, what are some of the biggest obstacles that you encounter? Anyone wants to start?
Well, organizational politics and bureaucracy, may I?
Definitely.
Yeah. But
Christine, do you want to share any kind of example, like concrete experiences? Or?
They exist, but they do exist, and they have to exist. Because sometimes we feel that, oh, why do we have to jump through so many hoops in order to get things done? And that's essentially what governance in spirit is, that dialectic process. So you might have a brilliant idea, but have we had the diverse perspectives to scrutinize it? And this is essentially the spirit of science, isn't it? You have to continue to try to disapprove it. And every time you do that, you actually make it a stronger proposition. So, I mean, having done governance-related work for many years, I have to say that I found it frustrating at times, but I know it's absolutely necessary. If it's done right, it's only going to make the solution better. And what I don't like is actually the people who focus on just talking about it instead of doing it. And that is the most frustrating part. Because there are a lot of people out there saying, oh, we have to have this policy and we have to do this and do that. And it ended up there's no follow-up. And that is probably the worst kind of obstruction, because you have the name of it, but you don't have the substance of it. So if we're going to have good governance, then make sure it is in place, make sure that it is applied, rather than just talking about it.
I mean, sitting on the entrepreneur side of the table, I think the two big things, the two biggest challenges were, one, regulations, and two, in some case, friction within local markets, particularly emerging markets. So frictions being things like corruption. On the regulatory bit, I think there has been a mindset shift over the last decade or so in terms of financial regulations and their openness to it. The thing is that most of this has happened in high income countries, starting with London, but then after that, propagating outwards. In emerging markets, in many emerging markets, in fact, most emerging markets, regulations still lag behind, and regulators still see themselves a lot like gatekeepers. So if you try something new or in between kind of specific policies or specific ideas in which they're thinking, many of them aren't very open to bending certain rules or creating sandbox-like environments, which you have present in high-income markets. This is changing quite quickly, but unfortunately, you still see a lack of financial innovation, or not a lack of financial innovation, but financial innovation which is to some extent hampered and actually grew around some of these restrictive regulations and these relatively slow-moving regulations in these countries. Friction working in local markets is also a big problem, particularly in financial services, where best practices is, you have everything transparent, have good governance, have very strong ethics, but it's sometimes difficult to follow, or not difficult to follow, but very penalizing to follow when actually working in these markets, especially when other companies and startups might not necessarily, or other players in the market might not be so agile, or might not keep to these ethics as strongly, and there are certain relationships and things like that which actually helps create more barriers and not a very equal playing field for financial innovations and what's best for customers and the financial health. So I think these are two probably most difficult challenges when I worked in these markets.
Right. I think from my personal experience, the challenge more from the inner side is pretty much the determination, actually, because many of the times working in, I would say, an impact sector in China, because the entire industry is not as mature as other parts of the world. So pretty much you are fighting against everyone. So for example, a very simple example of why I left my startup is actually because of that. So at that time, we were I was quite stick with empowering the microfinance institutions and extra way on making money, but as slowly, because it's a B2B solution. But at that time, we have those booming fintechs providing high interest loans to gig workers, and they're getting getting loads of investment, and they have a huge profit and get listed in Nasdaq. So we have a lot of pressure from our investors as well. You guys have the technology, so why you guys are working with like micro enterprises just to copy the business model, and you can get money. But we have I had a great argument with my co-founder, and eventually I left. So this is the kind of determination that all the doubts that actually you face. It's not an easy decision to make. It's the after you make a decision, at midnight, you're always like rethinking, am I really making the right decision? Am I like really gonna make and leading to the world that I'm dreaming about? But I think this is a growth process where you eventually figure that, okay, it's really not about how other people, and it's not really about how the site looks. It's pretty much about what is your guiding star, and what is the thing that you believe is the right thing to do, and that requires a lot of determination.
Great, thank you so much. I actually have many more questions to ask, but I want to make sure we're also addressing the audience question, because I see some questions are popping up. So we have one from Eatson. I think, Eatson, do you want to unmute yourself and ask the question yourself? I think it's addressed to Edward. If not, I can also help.
Yes, hello everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, my name is Edson. I'm talking from Mozambique, Africa. My question is for Edward. Yeah, I agree with your explanation. And my question is about the cost of internet. Looking forward to the conditions of the people living in rural areas. So how could we bring solutions that will allow them, because people living there don't have a higher financial conditions. So when we build this solution like a platform for payments, things like that, I think we should pay attention to the condition of the people that will use our platform, and ensure that this app or this platform will have a cost that will allow them to pay for it, use it, uh, according to their conditions. Because here in Mozambique, for example, we are running to energy transition. So solar panels, our all equipment that we use to build solar systems are very high. The cost is very high. So there are clients that you have, for example, that they can't afford for the system, not because the system is not efficient, but because of the cost of the system. So in this area, internet payment, online payments, how could we ensure that the cost will allow them to pay for it and use it? Thank you.
I think that's a great question, right? And it raises, I think, back to what I said earlier, right? It's a matter of cost or information, or the cost of information. And unfortunately, for many places around the world, that's still very much the case. The cost of internet, the cost is very prohibitive. And it's hardware which you need to use. Even smartphones in many cases are very prohibitive. Instead, people have feature phones. And that's initially, and it was in these restrictions, that's really how Bcash and M-Pesa really started, right? It was just impossible to get that. But they saw that people in rural areas were starting to get feature phones. And they always had access to, kiosks, which can top up money into their feature phone to tax people. So why not use that as a money transfer and a money wallet? Now, unfortunately, the world doesn't, the world and financial services and fintech moves together, right? It grows together. And you really see, or one of the best examples of booms which I've seen has been in India, because the deregulation and the entrance of Jio into the Indian market. I think the first time I went to India, or at least I remember very, very starkly, like the last time I went to India before the deregulation or before Jio came into the market, internet was just so expensive. Every time I went in, I had to buy a tourist SIM card. I think it was like $25 to $30. And it was like, it lasts for like 10 days or something like that. It's ridiculously expensive. The next time I went in, the prices just dropped like anything. And today it's the cheapest internet in the world. In fact, I could get better 4G coverage in rural India, which I was visiting, than I could get in Singapore or in London or in any of these high income countries, because the towers are just so expensive. And so that's really that leap which you see, and the technological leap, which then makes all these other services possible. Feature phones there have internet access. And because they have internet access, they could do so much more with it, both for money transfer and wallets to digital identities, to all these other things. unfortunately, there's very little which financial services companies can actually do to lower the cost of infrastructure itself. And it's about working around these. But I'm quite positive about the future as more and more countries are seeing the example of Geo, seeing how much it stimulated the economy in rural areas and helped revitalize a lot of the rural areas, and are actually trying to adopt something similar.
Great, thank you so much, Edward. We also have a question from Emmanuel on legislation compliance. Emmanuel, do you want to ask the question yourself? And I also just want to add, it doesn't say in the chat which speaker is it directed towards, but I think on the issue of regulation and compliance, I'm sure all of you actually will have something to say about it. So if you want to say something, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, so I'm not sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So yeah.
And Emmanuel, do you want to also say where you're dialing in from?
All right. I'm dialing in from Edinburgh, Scotland. And I guess my question here is regarding the regulations around the AI space that are coming in. I'm curious about how the financial world is responding to that, because it's happening in Europe, happening in the US, and also rumblings of it happening in China. So I'm wondering, like, what does that mean for, I guess, business in general, but particularly also for startups in the financial space, like, because I'm assuming there's going to be some cost to compliance. So it's an open question to the whole group.
I could answer the second question in terms of how likely it's going to affect organizations and startups. I think as mentioned earlier, a lot of governments are launching fintech sandboxes or financial sandboxes, or a lot of regulators, sorry. And so this usually creates protected environments for startups. And so a lot of these regulations don't necessarily hit startups that early on, and actually creates room to grow. So I'm very, very positive about these sandboxes. Unfortunately, they are still in a fraction of the countries out there, and very concentrated in high-income countries.
Well, I'll try to answer. Yeah, go ahead, Nancy.
No, go ahead, Christine. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was about to say, because I don't actually work in compliance, but I am aware that a lot of legal professionals are actively advising companies on these issues. That's all I can say. And from an investor's perspective, we're also engaging with a lot of companies around the awareness. But I still think that in general, most companies are still focused mainly on the principles perspective, which is of course important. But I think that when it comes to implementation, some of them would get a bit of a shock if when it comes down to the actual compliance with the spirit of the law. I think that we're seeing more and more examples coming out. So highly encourage companies to, in general, to be more prepared and aware of different use cases that are within the firm. It seems like that many companies are not even aware of the use of machine learning systems within the firm, because usually they start off with a business case in a particular business line, and then they all kind of do their own thing. And we need a much more coordinated approach at the center. Yes.
For me, I think it's definitely, as Quincy said, we have to prepare early for that, and especially how to embed sort of a mechanism in the process of business and operations to really examine the process to see whether there is a potential violation of legislation. And actually, all of those new regulations in AI and finances, you can find some related or can trace back those regulations in other applications in previous, non-digital finance. And I think there is for business owners of fintechs, there is a general principle, I think, I learned from a very senior financial service industry practitioner. So I once asked him, how do you know, whether this algorithm is ethical? To what extent will we use data to examine, to draw portfolios of customers? And he answered me that just imagine that your grandma or your daughter is in front of you, and you have to explain to her that why you are using this amount of data, why you are using this technology to do this to better serve them. If you're able to answer this question, then I'm sure pretty much you're fine. This could be like a baseline test.
I have a question of my own actually to Christine, because you talked about a more centralized approach, and I presume that's within the company itself and kind of technologies used within the company.
Yeah, within the company itself.
Yes. But with platform banking and kind of APIs, which basically spread out the risk across the system, there is a lot of increase in systemic risk because you have, eKYC done by a certain party, payments done by another party, transaction monitoring done by another, biometric verification, all of them done by different parties, essentially kind of combining the system together with APIs and, individual core banking systems. How do you think about centralization and that systemic risk across companies rather than within?
Yeah, that's open banking is a good example because when I say that centralization is the understanding of a company's application, and do they actually have a library or a registration system to know what they are using and what is being outsourced. It doesn't mean that the monitoring itself needs to be centralized. More of an information system that needs to be centralized, if that makes sense. And with open banking, obviously, the use of distributed ledger in registering information, hopefully, that is better. But I'm sure you're more of a technology expert than I am.
Great. I also see a question from Hao-Ying Wu, UNICEF. Hao-Ying, do you want to ask the question yourself? And maybe tell us where you're calling from. Thank you.
Okay, now I'm able to speak. Thank you, host. So thank you so much for all of your sharing of experience and insights. So I am dialing in from Geneva, and I work in the private sector fundraising and partnership in UNICEF, specifically for fundraising innovation. So we are funding internal projects or products for innovative fundraising solutions. And now there has been more and more discussions on innovative financing around child and child-related issues. So I actually have a question from Christine. You mentioned about greenwashing, and I was wondering if we're developing global impact standards relating to children or children-related issues. What are the biggest lessons learned we should keep in mind from other verticals like environmental impact standards to avoid, I would say, child-friendly washing in this space? Thank you.
Well, that's a very big question and very timely as well. I guess when it comes to child impact, we need to understand which are the areas that they could be impacted. There is through maybe social media, but also access to services as well. So I guess under the UN Guiding Principles, that have been around for a long time, many companies would quote them in their sustainability report, and I have to say that very, very few actually have a proper reporting, but also demonstrable evidence that they are applying it properly. And obviously, children's rights is definitely part of human rights, an important part, because that's where our future lies, really. So in my work on a day-to-day basis, we're actually focusing a lot on what does a high-quality human rights impact assessment would look like. We would encourage companies or institutions in general, instead of looking backward at controversies that might have existed from before, which it's a good example of what could go wrong, but much more, we should take a much more proactive and forward-looking approach, maybe putting together a heat map of key sectors, industries, and key applications that might lead to concerns of child rights violation, and have a heat map process. So you map markets and sector issues to applications at a product level and operation level, and be much more looking at which are the sort of hotspot of potential violation. And impact assessment is not just about looking at the risks. And I think that's when a lot of the due diligence process comes in. Due diligence alone is not enough. It's like when you've done something wrong or you potentially can do something wrong, saying sorry is not enough. You have to say, what am I going to do about it? So within UN guiding principles, there is an element of access to remedy of the grievance system. Many companies would only talk about, well, this is our policy. Well, that's not enough. I need to know how you're going to assess the effectiveness of those policy. And can you give me data that it is working? You know, having, for example, having no grievance, it doesn't mean it's working. It's only mean no grievance. There has got to be some kind of, you know, feedback in the mechanism that shows me that it's actually working, and how does company monitor that? And also, if something like that has been identified, what is the sort of assessment approach, and ultimately lead to fair access to remedy to sort out that situation or potential, which sometimes might be unintentional impact, right? Which could happen, right? We cannot predict everything. So I want to finish off with a quote from a professor from Carnegie Mellon. He passed away already. He died from I think cancer a few years ago. His name is Randy Pausch. Yeah, you can find his YouTube video online. He left it's called the last lecture for his children, because he died when his children was very young. He said that there are three parts. Well, I see some nods now, so I might quote it wrong. There are three parts to a good apology. You say, I'm sorry, I am wrong, and what am I going to do about it? And a good apology should at least have these three elements, because otherwise it could be just another sort of sorry washing, I guess. I hope I answered your question. Thank you.
That's very insightful life lesson. Thank you, Christine. So we also have a question from Adula. Adula, do you want to unmute yourself and ask the question yourself? Let me see whether. Hello?
Hello?
Hi, Abdullah. Can you hear us?
The participants will be able to unmute themselves now.
Okay, I think Abdullah is actually not muted now. Do you want to ask the question yourself? If not, I can also help.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Hi, so my question is more around like, this is the forum for the youth, right? So more about like, how can youth participate in the fintech revolution? In terms of incorporating AI with the fintech space. What are some opportunities for youth? Any of the companies here, okay. The internships or mentorship opportunities for young youth? I'm calling from the US.
I think it's the connection is a little off. But so I'm just going to repeat it for people. So the question is on youth participation. So one of the questions I wanted to ask as well. So how can youth participate in the fintech innovation and AI collaboration, and also the intersection? So for example, participating in internships, or share some ideas with the audience.
I think there are a lot of things that can be done. Actually, fintech has been involved for some years, and there are loads of resources available online and open like university. So I think you can learn a lot of knowledge from online itself. And also I think if you really are interested in this sector, as we discussed before, to really try to not to dive through the noise of all those buzzwords about about the fintech and AI, but really understand what each company are solving the problems, what the problems that they're solving, and get close in the ground to understand the people that are suffering from the problems. Also, in that case, I believe that people can get really concrete and solid in this area, the knowledge, and also to be in the field, to understand the people and the problem, to not be kind of see all the, to be illusion, like to have the delusion of all the buzzword about technology. That's my kind of view. Yeah.
I guess internships is one way, but probably the best way you learn the most is start a company.
I love that. Thank you, Edward. Anything you want to share on this youth participation point, Christine?
No, I think that was good response. I'm good.
Okay, sounds great. We have, I'm not sure whether this is I think it's the last question from Daniel from Kuala Lumpur. Daniel, feel free to ask away. So he just said his background is noisy, so I'm going to ask on his behalf. So I think this is actually directed to Christine and Nancy. The question is, how do you improve trust in AI in fintech, particularly in fintech operations?
Well, there are many principles out there that try to address the trust issues. Consent, when when AI applications is applied, how it is being applied, the whole construction process, starting from what is the objective? I think we had to start from the very beginning. Why is it being applied? Who is it being used on? And when something goes wrong, how do you detect it? So there are many principles out there that talks about similar process. And I guess a lot of them are recommending having a diverse team to be able to look at the from data collection to curated data applications, to the modeling, to the application, to adjustment, and then ultimately deployment, and getting customer feedback. If it's used on employees, getting employee feedback and consent first. All of this would be important to build trust. And also don't always say that everything is going well, everything is rosy, because any person with some sense would know that whatever we do in something, in a new area, in new applications, there are always lessons learned. Be honest about those lessons. And if you think of investors, when we engage with companies, we're not always asking for companies to tell us what's going well. We also ask companies on what are your challenges. It would be weird if companies said that we have no challenges, everything is going well, everything is just absolutely fine. You wouldn't believe that. And same for AI as well. As long as we're honest about the lessons and about what we're doing to make it better, and I think we're on a good foundation to build and strengthen that trust.
Yeah. So apart from like transparency and also how to make AI more explainable, I think another important issue is that like from my own personal experience, I see a lot of disconnection with people who design the AI, people sitting in the technology office, with the people who are in the ground, people who are using it. So this kind of disconnection actually, I would say, would be one source of the trust, because people would see that the people who designs it doesn't understand me. And that kind of feeling will create a distrust. So for example, I was working with, I was looking into the financial health of elderly and Asian population in China. So I did a field research back in November last year. So elderly population and people would think that they just inherently don't trust in technology and AI. But it turns out it's pretty much not true. They use WeChat, they use WeChat payment a lot. So the very essence reason is that they think the current other financial digital service providers, they are too quick. They don't want frictionless experiences. They want it to be slower. They want double confirmation. They want people to guide them and teach them, which is rather counterintuitive, but this is what they need. So I think this is one thing we can improve in when we're designing AI applications in fintech, to really to have a diverse team to understand different needs of our people and design solutions from their perspective. Yeah.
That's great, thank you. I think we are actually able to run, answer all the audience questions, which I feel rarely happens on a panel. So hooray to that. And I want to thank all our participants, our audience who dialed in and asked the questions. It's really cool actually to hear everyone dialing in from very different parts of the world. I have one more last question to end today's panel for our speakers. And it's a question I didn't tell you in advance, so it's a surprise. So the question is, if you want to tell today's youth who want to work in AI and fintech, fintech or not, right? Just maybe AI in general, or the better word used by Christine, functional approximator, right? What are the 3 words you want to tell, our audience on the panel today? What are just 3 words they should be aware of, keep in mind? What are 3 words you would highlight?
Okay, I'm going to jump in before other people say my word. Definitely passion, because passion is that one thing that gives you that determination to push through everything, that everything gets thrown at you during that process. And it cannot be forced. Maybe you develop over time. Maybe it continues to grow over, sometimes it comes up in areas that you do not expect, but be at ease. So have passion, but be at ease with yourself. Don't force it, because the right thing will come to you. And if it feels right, it will continue to grow stronger as a passion for what you want to devote your life to. Reflect on it over time. I think in the Chinese word, they would saying that you reflect on yourself 3 times a day. For me, I mean, I don't even get lunch in a long enough a time to have lunch. So 3 times a day is quite a lot. But before I go to bed, reflect on what have I done everything I could today to do the job that I want to do. If you've done that, okay, go to sleep. I found it very helpful to think of it that way, so that nothing gets left till tomorrow. I do what I can, and maybe sometimes I cannot finish everything, but it's the passion, it's being at ease and reflect on what I do so that I can do it better tomorrow. That really helps. Yes.
Okay, I gotta go next. So for me, I think the first word I can think of is really to build people up. The purpose of why you're entering into this industry. So for me, this is something that encouraged me for a long time. So it's actually a quote from Bible. So it says, there's a lot of things that you can do, but not everything builds people up. So I think this is kind of the guiding star of me in the industry and what kind of the things that I do and I don't do. I think the second word I can think of is resilience. So, AI and finance is a sector that brings a lot of profits, a lot of money. So everybody's chasing after that. So definitely going to be a lot of, buzz, and there's got a lot of noise in this industry. And if you stick to your purposes and value systems, sometimes you do hit a lot of walls. So how to have resilience in this environment is quite important. And finally, I would say enjoy. So no matter it's difficult or tough, I do want everybody to enjoy this experience, because this is something that if it's truly from your heart, as Christian said, you would enjoy the hardship, you would enjoy the toughness, and you would enjoy the intensity. And I really hope everybody could strive that.
Had to top both of them. Say one, don't be afraid to look stupid and make mistakes. I think the space is filled with jargon. It's moving very quickly. And a lot of people like to throw around terms, which, especially if you're just entering, it's very hard to catch up. Don't be afraid to look stupid and ask why or what that is, and to make, mistakes, as long as it's not going to, as long as you're not in control of other people's money. I think that's one. Two, it's be curious. There's a lot of innovation going on. There's, you can't capture everything, but I think because of the breadth of innovation, there's always a place for curiosity and to keep learning. Yeah, I'm stuck at 2, so I've got to leave it at that.
Great. Thank you all so much. So for those who celebrate Chinese New Year, so we actually just entered a new Lunar New Year for Year of the Tiger. And I love being in China because I feel like I get to do New Year twice, right? If you didn't do New Year resolution the first time, right, you get a second chance. And at least for me, I'm going to keep these 8 words in mind as I launch into the new year. I just want to thank our speakers again for sharing your insights with us today. I feel personally very inspired and energized by them. And also thank our audience for joining us and dialing in from different corners of the world and ask brilliant questions. You can stay on for another 10 minutes to network and wait for the next session to start. And I also want to note that the recordings for this session will be up on AI Future Lab's website and podcast, but probably about end of the month. So that's all for today. Thank you all so much. Feel free to stay on if you want to,